Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you all had a really great weekend. Every weekend, every Sunday, I like to go over my top meta breakers of the week. And they're all lists that hit Mythic successfully with over a 60% win rate. And with that being said, though, I did talk a little bit last week about how you can kind of manipulate your MMR. And so as we get near the end of the season, we're going to see a lot weaker decks making it into Mythic. Just start things off with that asterisk. So these are all going to be off-meta picks, and I define the meta as Boros Humans, Boros Convoke, Mono White Humans, Monor Red Prowess, Azorius Control, Rakdos Aggro, Mono Red Aggro, and Celestia Enchantments. If you want my thoughts on those, I'll be sharing them during my Best of 1, Best of 3 meta review on Mondays. So we're wrapping up Week 10 of Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and going to start things off here with Orov Control by Sir Argon. And went 104 and 69 for a 60% win rate. However, there was a possibility of a low MMR, since there was a large number of losses at Plat 4 before the climb into Mythic. And so if you didn't listen to my ramblings last week, you can lose just a whole bunch of games in a row, and then that will make your next matches a lot easier. So it's one of those things I always keep an eye on. For example, the most common matchup was against Mono Black, and usually you see more of like Mono Red, Azorius Control, and Boros Convoke. And then the weaker the MMR, you start seeing more Mono Black matches. And this deck is weak to Boros Convoke. It is weak to Boros Convoke, one of the issues, and that's why we've got the 2 copies of the Temporary Lockdown. And but basically, we're doing what Azorius Control is doing, except for instead of counter spells, we're just killing creatures, right? So we've got the Sheoldred's Edict, we've got the March of Wretched Sorrow, we've got the Cut Down. All of this really just like spot removal. No creatures in the list. Temporary Lockdown is the sweeper against Boros Convoke. Phyrexian Arena to gain some card advantage. Celestis for some life gain and filtering. Not on my watch, which I thought was an interesting inclusion. I probably would go for Get Lost instead of Not on My Watch, because it does hit Planeswalkers, helps you out against the Azorius Control matchup, but is kind of a budget option. And then we've got 4 copies of the Outrageous Robbery, and so this is probably the answer to the more controlling, more grindy matchups, is that you just mill them out. Kind of like it's Black's alternative to Jace. And then we've also got the End, which can be particularly useful for any of the combo decks, although we haven't seen a whole lot of the Reanimator currently in the meta. And then we've got Sunfall as your classic sweeper, exiling everything and then making incubator tokens, as well as Farewell. So we've got a total of 6 sweepers and 8 sweepers with the Deadly Cover-Up. And so very good against the creature-centric decks, and then the non-creature-centric decks is the backup plan is Mill. And then we've got Ashiok, Wicked Manipulator, which is basically the deck's like win condition through damage, is winning things out with the Manlands of Restless Fortress and Ashiok, Wicked Manipulator. And yeah, so that will be number 1. The other thing that I do is every Sunday I put up a poll that you guys can vote on which one of these decks you would like to see played, and in the Best of 1 ladder. So this will be number 1. Still waking up a little bit. Gotta get my coffee. All right, so here we go. We've got Golgari Poison is number 2. This one was by Mr. Leahy. And it went 52 and 21 for 71%, and also had a possible low MMR, since the most common matchup was Mono Green. And it was Mono Green, and I think this one's an interesting one to explore. The other thing too is that like I just like to do these for explorations largely. Because like if you really wanted to just jam up to Mythic or whatever, right, you could manipulate the MMR, you could run one of the top meta decks like Boros Convoke or Mono Red Prowess, and so this is an interesting one to explore, because during the rotation we're going to see kind of a debate about whether or not Golgari or Celestia is going to be the new home for the poison strategy. And so this one we've got, so Venerated Rot Priest is not going away. A lot of the toxic cards are from the Phyrexia All Will Be One. And so you're trying to win the game through either damage or poison counters. You're kind of simultaneously affecting your opponent on both fronts. And there's definitely some cards in here. This is a good example of what I mean about potentially having a really good stat and hitting into Mythic, but not really coming up against like the top meta decks. And I assume that if I were to run this, it would probably be a little bit lower. Because we see some of these inclusions that aren't terribly common in the toxic space. But anyway, we've got the Venerated Rot Priest. Downside is that we don't have a way to like March of Swirling Mist to give them a whole bunch of poison counters at one time. But we still have the like fight spell, where if you're targeting your creature to fight something, it gives them a poison counter. We've got the cut down for classic black removal, as well as the go for the throats. And then we've also got the Blightbelly Rat, which is a toxic creature that when it dies, it proliferates. The Necrogen Communion is another one that I think I haven't seen a whole lot of in other lists, and it's okay if you're putting it onto evasive flyers, but then again, it's weak to interaction. So being able to give something hitting for Toxic 3 is fine, but we don't have the advantages of white with the double strike too. So it's kind of nice, though, for putting it on something that has a death trigger where you can proliferate. So I see where they're going with it. I'm just a little bit uncertain about its overall efficacy at a higher MMR. Bloated Contaminator is a classic one that we see in the Celestia space as well, with the trample and being able to proliferate the poison counters. Ichorspit Basilisk is one that we don't usually see, so 1/3 Death Toucher. Would be nice if we were able to give this trample with one of the green spells and up its power. Plague Nurse, like I mentioned, this one's one common that we had in Phyrexia All Will Be One that doesn't usually see a lot of play. You get a 3/4 Toxic 2, and then each other creature you control with Toxic gains Toxic 1, and so you can, if you are pumping the board wide, give everything Toxic. And then we've got the Venomous Brutalizer, another one that we don't usually see, but fits the theme. And it enters battlefield, you may pay 1 and a red if you, or 1 and a green, sorry, if you do proliferate. And so, I don't know. I'm having a hard time articulating my thoughts on this one. I'm not convinced that this is better than the Celestia space where we have the Skrelv and the Double Striker, but the advantage being that we have better removal in this space in black, bringing in the black. And I do think that there's some better alternatives to some of these commons and uncommons that we're running in this space, but still, a worthy exploration. And then we have Necrogen Rot Priest, which is a I guess the payoff to being in Golgari is that we're able to play the Necrogen Rot Priest. Whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter. So with this, I really want to see more evasion, right? I want to see ways to get trample in. I want to see maybe some more flyers or something, because this is great if your creatures are able to get through and deal damage. So the other thing too is that like it feels like it would be weak against Boros Convoke because there's nothing in here that's really helping you with the go wide situation. But definitely feels like somewhat of a beginner deck that made it into Mythic. But trying to not just completely critique it to all hell, right? Goliath Hatchery. I've never seen this one played. This one in the sideboard here. Create 2 3/3 green beast creature tokens with Toxic, and then if they're corrupted at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent has 3 or more, you then draw cards equal to the total Toxic value. It's a way to kind of refuel the hand. So, very interesting deck here by Mr. Leahy. Alright, the third option here is Monor Red Prowess, and this is a meta deck. Now, it is doing enough, barely, for it to not be identified by my bot as Monor Red Prowess. So we see a couple of things that we don't usually see in the Monor Red Prowess lists. We've got like the Reckless Impulse. We've got the 4 copies of the Demonic Ruckus to really help against the Boros Convoke matchup. Being able to give your creature Menace helps get through the chump blockers. And we have a Bloodthirsty Adversary, which usually we see in Mono Red. I kind of like the 1 of inclusion, though, because even though we're on 18 lands, the deck will flood out occasionally, and Bloodthirsty Adversary then being able to trigger prowess by replaying like a lightning strike or play with fire. But other than that, we've got kind of your classic just prowess creatures that then Ancestral Anger giving you the card draw, and one copy of Feldon, which seems kind of random, and then the 3 copies of Godric, which have been pretty standard in the Monor Red prowess space. So the reason why I wanted to include this one is because this one, the MMR did look good. So this one was by Mixie182, went 58 and 36 for 62%, and looked like a pretty good build against Boros Convoke. So a lot of the decks that I've been talking about have been weak to Boros Convoke. So if you're wanting to destroy Boros Convoke, Monor Red Prowess is your best way to go. And this one looks like it's attacked relatively heavily against Boros Convoke. So it went 13 and 3 for 81% against Boros Convoke, and thought it was worth a mention. All right, and we've got 2 Orsov decks to explore this week. So the 4th one will be Orov Tokens by symbols that I don't know how to pronounce. And it went 97 and 66 for a 60% win rate. This was another one that possibly had a low MMR because it did have a large number of losses at Plat 4 before climbing into Mythic. The most common matchup was, again, Mono Black. And but I like where it's going. I like the approach. So we're leaning on the token production of Wedding Announcement to then trigger our Welcome to Takashia's Welcome. And we've got this kind of your classic... It's another one that's... It's basically an Orsov control shell, right? The one card that I thought was kind of a head-scratcher was this Torpor Orb. This is kind of like... Why not just run the Thrall, that the flyer that prevents triggers from happening? I guess it's harder for them to remove as an artifact, but it's got a little bit of non-synergies with like our Deep Cavern Bat, then gets silenced by our own orb. So just kind of an odd one of inclusion, right? We've got Duress and Dreams of Steel and Oil to attack our opponent's hand, Case of the Uneaten Feast to give some curious life gain, Ambitious Farmhand to go find a Plains, Rest in Peace for a little bit of like a one of Graveyard Hate. So like the other thing too is I kind of want to see some of this just focused up and maybe like 3 copies of Duress instead of some of these one-ofs. But we've got the Skrelv's Hive, which is another token producer along with the Wedding Announcement. And these are really the core engines of the deck, right? We've got Rite of Oblivion, which I like to see this one with the Hopeless Nightmare, having something that you kind of get a something that has the bargain synergies. You can sacrifice a token, but like I think there's some alternatives to potentially explore with Rite of Oblivion, attacking their hand instead of doing the life total. But it was probably included to try to improve the matchups against Monor Red. We've got the Legions to Ashes, and I think this is kind of like the Boros Convoke answer. 1 copy of Celestis. Archangel Elspeth to help against the early pressure, depopulate as a board wipe. 1 Wandering Emperor, and I wonder if we should see more of these, but again, this one's going away in rotation here in August 2nd. 2 copies of Beseech the Mirror, so that we can kind of take advantage of the one of kind of style going on in the deck. Go find our 1 copy of Virtue of Loyalty, go find our 1 copy of Virtue of Persistence. Kind of, I see where they're going with the Beseech the Mirror. Again, I would rather have something more interesting for Beseech the Mirror, like Hopeless Nightmare, to do the bargain with. Because you've got multiple things that want to do the bargain, so something to consider there. 1 copy of Farewell, Chimmel, the Inner Sun, which if they don't have an artifact, this can just run away with the game. And then Virtue of Persistence, I kind of want to see more of this. I think this would help more so than the Case of the Uneaten Feast for helping stabilize against Mono Red. And then you wouldn't necessarily need to run the tutors to go get the Virtue of Persistence. But anyway, it's still another one to kind of test out. I feel like it's weaker than the first one as far as just like a strictly control space goes. But it is doing more of the mid-range tokens thing, which then makes me want more Virtue of Loyalties, because if this one thing gets destroyed, then our tokens aren't really going to do much just as 1/1s, right? So, I don't know. Feels like a little bit of a glass cannon. But like I mentioned, this is the end of the season, so we're going to see some weaker decks, and still fun to explore alternative builds. And on Monday, I'll be going over my best of one, best of three sideboard guide, or best of one, best of three meta review for some more tried and true decks, if that's what you enjoy. And then on Tuesday, I'll be going over our community decks. So still, I'm not going to actually showcase any games from them, but I do want to just talk about the lists and give you my thoughts on them, as well as just showcase off some of them, because I think some of them are really good builds. So. With that, though, that's going to be it for me. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and I will see you all tomorrow for the meta review. Take care.